Good day everyone, so imagine this, you've just gotten your Kokomi from the Chronicled Wish and you are now the proud owner of a Sangonomiya Kokomi. So, what do you do with the character? Well, you probably reached my channel and I'll be honest, here at Kokomi Clan I'm a bit of a special nutcase. I take Kokomi across the entire world of Tevat, and when I mean the entire world, I mean specifically out of bounds in many places and quest areas to take beautiful photos. But that aside, what do most normal players do? Most normal players would either play Kokomi for the meta or for the Spiral Abyss. That's pretty much like 99% of content creators on YouTube. They're always just going to be telling you to get Farina instead and use the Escoffier for the Kokomi Freeze team, and Nilo Bloom team has fallen off, so why even bother? That's kind of like the traditional wisdom, whatever. The other school of thought, which is a school of thought that I endorse, is the one that says, well, hey, playing a Spiral Abyss or one specific floor over and over is just pure insanity, so you'd rather do the logical thing where you're going to spend 99% of your time playing Genshin in the Overworld, and that is where you're going to try and see, can I get value from my Kokomi? So how do you play Kokomi in the Overworld? Well, ever since her release, and I've documented this on my YouTube channel, people have found that Kokomi is incredibly comfy in the Overworld because you pop down a jellyfish. If enemies are floating around, you can still auto-target and hit them. Kokomi is such a very good character, especially if you farm the Ocean Newt Clam set, because you get the Hydro and the physical damage to deal with quite a variety of scenarios. So in this case, something like the Sumeru Rainforest, some of the plains on Fontaine, a lot of the Natlan regions really do favor Kokomi. To a lesser extent the Inazuma areas, unless you're going to use Kokomi exclusively for traversing perhaps on some of the walking on water. But in Inazuma you've got a lot more ruin guards and enemies that have slightly higher physical resistance, so that's kind of a bit of a more tricky thing. But other than that, your Mondstads and parts of Leeway, especially your more open plains, Kokomi really shines in a lot of those areas. Where Kokomi doesn't shine so well is typically where other characters that have a fixed burst, in other words you use your burst and you get like the Bennett Circle or the Gene Circle, or you put down Kokomi's jellyfish and the jellyfish is stuck in one area and you've got like a circle of healing. Traditionally any place that's got like a very slanted slope, that's where you're going to struggle with someone like Kokomi, where there's lots of verticality. In fact, you'll struggle with a lot of other characters, precisely because if the enemies are on uneven foot, you'd either have to group them, or it's going to be like difficult for your jellyfish to hit them whilst you're running up and down to get them. So a classic example is if you go to the Sumeru Desert, there's lots of, especially like the area with the big like storm, there are lots of verticalities there, and it might make the area seem small, but if you kind of like trace out how much you have to walk, it's quite a sizable distance. But the effect is, if you plop down Kokomi's jellyfish, it's almost like you're putting in a horizontal slice into this very vertical map. And unfortunately in cases like these, the enemies are much more spread out vertically up and below, and that means that you're not going to get the benefit of Kokomi's jellyfish, although Kokomi's ranged attacks certainly are going to register, which is like the other thing. So in a certain sense, despite the fact that Kokomi has the restriction of her heals not moving where you are, for instance if you think of a Baiju or something like a Shilonen or like a Sichuan that can heal you where you're moving, the jellyfish certainly can give you that a bit of a disadvantage as opposed to those other characters. But if you play it really well, it's not that problematic, especially if you've got a very mobile unit, for instance like Varina or like Malvika recently in Natlan. It's very easy to play around your jellyfish, which is the type of playstyle that I would advocate. But regardless, Kokomi is very comfy in the Overworld, and generally that's what you'll use her for, to be a very comfy travel companion, and especially for people that aren't very skillful or that are very much afraid of taking hits or like struggling with enemies that are perhaps like that have higher defenses and stuff. Kokomi is an ideal character just because she gives you that tankiness, she gives you those heals, she's a very comfy character, and that is something that ultimately is going to be much better than trying to get someone like an Escoffier for the Overworld, because Escoffier and characters like Shilonen are typically more geared towards endgame type of content where you've got really powerful builds, and having these powerful builds means that your characters can dish out extreme amounts of damage. So when you're traveling in the overworld, survivability is less of a concern. But if you are in the position of still going through a lot of the Genshin journeys, or you're just like casually exploring and wanting to get 100% on the maps, a character like Kokomi, really, you can definitely feel the difference. I think if you have someone like Sichuan, I would arguably say that, yeah, maybe you could then argue, is it worthwhile to have Kokomi or not? Maybe not really, but if you don't have Sichuan, Kokomi is very, very comfy, because typically other healers would have to rely on their elemental burst to heal, and that can be problematic in some instances, especially if you don't have like a very big roster of characters. So that's how I see the modern state of Kokomi. You use her as a very, very pretty character to take photos, to enjoy the overworld, and from a combat perspective, if you're like me and you love experimenting, Kokomi is a character that genuinely can slot into a lot of teams, even though she's not going to be super optimal in giving you the best speed running clearing times. She is very flexible in terms of fitting in these teams and just giving you a lot to experiment with. For instance, if you want to try and run the legendary Sukokumon with Fischl, Xiangling, Kokomi and Sucrose, that is a very fun team to really learn and test your understanding on how the elemental system works, how you need to be precise in positioning. Another fun team that I like is of course the Nilo team with Nahida, Nilo, Kokomi and Kole, or Kirara depending on circumstances, and that team is all about the Dendro, Hydro, Aura management, constant quick swapping. It's a team that I've covered so much on this channel and love so much of. It's lots of skill expression that doesn't just rely on you having these incredible artifacts and having one single character that you're just going to put in all your buffs and then bam, you have this Mavrika 1 million K whatever melt. It's not like that. The teams that Kokomi typically are involved with are teams that rely on you understanding the elemental system, how elemental reactions work, how the elemental gauge theory work, and there's a lot of nuance into playing these different teams where you can get a lot more damage than people might think. Other things are that if you want to perhaps have a bit of a modern twist on your taser teams, let's say you've gotten an Auroron or like an Aoife recently, you can plop in with Fischl and Kokomi Demonate team. You're going to have a very, very fun time with your Electrocharge teams. You can even, if you really like Xiangling, or maybe substitute in Mavuiko or someone like Adeya, you could play some very interesting Burgeon teams of Kokomi. There are many variations, especially with Kokomi and Farina both being in a team where you just get a lot of support. You can run Mono Hydra, you can run all sorts of other elemental variations, even freeze teams with Ayaka. If you don't have someone like Escoffier, you can still run Kokomi just as well in the traditional Ayaka team. So from a combat perspective, Kokomi is incredibly malleable. There's a lot you can do in terms of team building, and you can get decent solid results even to a point of consistently beating these Power Abyss floor 12. I've always maintained that they're always a team, like for Kokomi, to go and beat up the Abyss, even if she doesn't take a direct role in dealing out the damage like in the Nilo Bloom teams or the Mono Hydra teams, but just even from a support perspective, the heals and the ability to give you like attack buffs and such, and to trigger elemental reactions, Kokomi just has it all. Her ability to do multiple things, even though the value of those individual components might have been power crept by more specialist characters, what she can still do as a holistic package, that is very, very powerful. And it all just comes down to the fact that Kokomi is so good at role consolidation and the interaction of her role consolidation with many abilities. That's what makes Kokomi such a defining character. And she's incredibly pretty, so I mean that's it. But yeah, these are just like some ideas just to give people a bit of perspective. Modern Genshin, in my opinion, has moved away from being very meta focused. Hoya tries to sell characters on the meta because they're not getting in a lot of newer players, but especially for people that might be new, hopefully this video can help just generate some random ideas. But ultimately, Genshin is a game where you are given effectively a bit of a sandbox, and part of that sandbox environment is exploring, is enjoying your character beyond just the combat. And I do think Kokomi still provides enough of that. She provides you enough in terms of the combat itself. It's just that the character content is not always there, but I mean that is a Hoyo thing, that's not a Kokomi specific thing. A lot of characters suffer, a lot of older characters suffer with the lack of like updated content, you know, to breathe in life into them. But I mean that's just the nature of gacha games, so it is unfortunately what it is. From my perspective, I love Kokomi. I'm really crazy about Kokomi. You can look at all my YouTube videos, all my community posts. I'm still going to keep on playing with Coco Fish. Whether it's in here, whether we're going to use a mod like in Withering Waste with Cantarella, or even taking the Kokomi mod and using Kokomi in other games like Craftopia and in other like mediums. I just love taking my Kokomi around. So that's the passion I have for the character, and if you are now a new proud Kokomi owner, hey, you know what? Welcome to the family, because it's the Coco family. It might be small, but oh boy, we certainly are passionate about Kokomi. Alright guys, I can honestly keep on continuing, so I'm gonna cut the video here, but if you've made it this far, really appreciate you for watching and being passionate about our little Coco fish. Thank you for watching, cheers!